So now when we are discussing about basic testing, so बहुत सारे points जो हम लोगों ने miss out किए थे, that's what we'll be discussing now. कि अर्ली टेस्ट हम लोगों ने किया था. अब अर्ली टेस्टिंग के बाद में अगर अल्फा टेस्ट कर रहे हैं या कंटिन्यूसली कोई चीज़ों को टेस्ट कर रहा है तो उसका रीज़न क्या होता है, उसको हम लोग क्या टेस्ट बोलते हैं, स्मोक टेस्ट बोलते हैं, स्ट्रेस टेस्टिंग बोलते हैं. तो वो जो हम लोगों ने डिस्कस नहीं किया था ना, दैट्स व्हाट विल बी डिस्कसिंग नाउ. सो फर्स्ट ये देखो, और उसके बाद में हम लोग टेस्ट केसेस कैसे लिखते हैं हम लोग इन एनी एक्स वाई जी टाइप ऑफ एन एनवायरनमेंट, हाउ टू राइट अ टेस्ट केस, वो देखेंगे हम लोग. ठीक है. सो विल जस्ट क्विकली हैव अ लुक एट दिस, जहाँ पे हम लोग कोई टेस्ट केसेस कैसे लिख सकते हैं वो भी देखता है. ठीक है, ध्यान से देखो.
Hey guys, I'm Archana from Edureka and I welcome you all to this session on two most misunderstood topics in software testing, which are smoke testing and sanity testing. But before we proceed, let's go ahead and take a look at the topics which we will be talking about in today's session. So guys, we will begin this session by talking about different types of software testing types. And then we will move on to our today's topic, which is smoke testing. There we will learn what smoke testing is, why and when to perform smoke tests, and finally how to conduct some smoke tests. And then we will move on to our next topic, which is sanity testing. There we will learn what sanity testing is, how to conduct sanity tests. And finally, we will end this session by discussing the key differences between smoke testing and sanity testing. So I hope agenda was clear to you guys. Let's get started then. As you guys know, today's world of technology is completely dominated by machines, and their behavior is controlled by the software powering it. Software testing is crucial because it identifies errors or bugs from a system at the beginning stage. Before software is released, it undergoes through rigorous testing. Chances are you already know this. Testing is an integral part of any successful software project. It's basically the process of executing the software or any sort of application to find out if there are any bugs or some kind of errors in it. So programmers check for any mistakes or problems in the design and the functionality of the software. Until then, the product won't be available for commercial use in the market. We have different types of software testing. The types of software testing usually depends on multiple factors like project requirements, budget, timeline, and suitability, expertise, and all that. But usually it's divided into two main types of testing, which we call functional testing and non-functional testing. So functional testing is defined as type of testing which verifies that each function of the software application that you're testing is working properly under given conditions. That's what functional testing is. Whereas non-functional testing is a testing to determine the performance of a system to measure, validate, or verify quality attribute of the system to check if the software that you've built is working properly or not. So under functional testing, we have further categories such as unit testing, integration testing, system testing, interface testing, smoke testing, sanity testing, regression testing, and acceptance testing. While explaining all this type of testing in this session is out of scope, if you want to know more, there are separate videos in the software testing playlist in Edureka YouTube channel. So go ahead and take a look. Moving on, under non-functional testing as well, we have multiple types of testing like documentation testing, installation testing, performance testing, reliability and security testing, and many more. But as for today's session, the topics that we are interested in are going to learn are smoke testing and sanity testing. So smoke testing and sanity testing are the most misunderstood topics in software testing usually. There's a lot of information available on internet on this topic, and yet most of them seem confusing. So today in this session, let's figure out what smoke testing and sanity testing are and how different they are from each other. But before we go ahead and discuss all those topics, there's a term that you should know about, which is software build. And if you don't know, that's not an issue. Let's learn what that is. So when you're developing a simple software program that consists of few lines of source code, It's easy to compile and execute. You agree with me, right? But that's not the thing which happens in real situation. Typically, a software program or application usually has hundreds and thousands of source code lines. So creating an executable program for huge source code file is really complicated and literally time consuming process. So you need a build here to generate the executable program. So the term build is the process by which source code is converted to standalone form that can be run on any kind of system. And this complete process is known as software build and software testing. Well, sometimes the software build is also referred to as code build. Now, if you're wondering why I'm discussing here about software build, well, the term is being mentioned in the further part of the session. So I hope that you understood what software build is. Let's move on. So here we are with the today's topic, which is smoke testing. Smoke testing is a kind of software testing which is usually performed after software build to make sure that the critical functionalities of your program are working well and fine. While it's executed before any detailed functional or any regression tests are executed on the program, the purpose here is to reject a badly broken application so that your QA team or the testing team does not waste time installing and testing the software application further. So the main objective of smoke testing is not to perform exhaustive testing, but to verify that the critical functionalities, or you can say the main functionalities of the program or the system are working fine. Well, let's discuss a simple example. Well, if you're given a Gmail application to test, what are the important functions? Log into Gmail, compose mail, and send. Correct, right? So for instance, if there's an error in sending a mail, does it make sense to test sent mail, drafts, folders, etc.? No, right? Which means you're rejecting the build without further testing. Smoke testing performed on particular build is also known as build verification test. So the main focus in smoke testing is to test the critical areas and not the final details. Here we go. I have a small depiction of smoke testing here. As you can see, we perform smoke testing on very initial builds before these builds are sent to any further testing like functional or regression testing. So let's say I have 3 builds here and one of them needs testing. It's sent to smoke test. The smoke test is performed. And if it passes, if all the critical functionalities like in Gmail, the login, compose, and send all are working, then it's sent to past builds where it's passed on for the further test like regression or functional, any other kind of test. But if you find an error, instead of checking other features, like again the Gmail example, sent mail, draft, folders, and all, the build is rejected. So that's what smoke testing is all about. You understood, right? So the main thing is here, the initial builds are tested for errors. And if there are errors, the build is rejected. If there are no errors, then the build is forwarded for further tests. Now the question here is, why smoke testing? Smoke testing is done to ensure that the critical functionalities of your program are working as expected and not concerned about the inner details. Well, that's because if the major functionality does not work, then there's no point in testing the other details. It's waste of time and effort on QA or testing team. Now, who does this smoke testing? Sometimes development team does smoke test before deploying the build to make sure that the build is good, while sometimes QA team or the testing team performs basic tests before starting the detailed testing. Now, as for typical examples which come under smoke testing, we have verification of the application, if it's either launched successfully or not, or verifying the graphical user interface of application is responsive or not, or verifying if financial transactions are completed well or not. So before you move on to any other functionality, you need to check the basic functionalities of your program are working properly or not. That's the objective of smoke testing. So smoke testing basically saves time as you do not have to test the whole application if the core functionalities of the program are not working. So the primary focus will be core application workflow in case of smoke testing. So now that you know what smoke testing is, let's go ahead and see how smoke testing is actually performed. So here I have a simple example, or you can say a workflow. So to conduct the smoke testing, you do not have to write any test cases. You just have to pick the necessary test cases that are already written or defined by programmers. So your objective here is application workflow, like I said earlier. So we can pick test cases from the test suite that cover major functionalities of the software program that you are testing. For example, so assume you're working on an e-commerce site. When a new build is released for testing, as a software QA team, you have to make sure that whether the core functionalities are working or not. So what you do, you try to access the e-commerce site, add an item in your cart, and place an order. That's a major workflow in most of the e-commerce sites, right? So if the flow works, you can say this build is passed. You can move on to functional testing on the same build. So as you can see in this example, I have a release build or the initial build, and I'm selecting certain test cases from the test suite, and I'm performing smoke test on that test cases. First of all, what I'm trying to do is access homepage, check if it's working properly or not. Then the main concept here or in the any e-commerce site is to check if you're able to select the items which you want to buy and place order. That's the main functionality, right? So the workflow is checked here. So you're checking if you can place order. If you are able to place order properly, it means that your build has passed smoke testing and it move on to the next type of testing. If it is failed, then the build is rejected without any further tests. So that's how simple smoke testing is. That's all about smoke testing. Now let's move on to next type of testing, which is sanity testing. Sanity testing is usually performed after receiving a software build with minor changes in code or functionality. The main objective here is to confirm that the bugs have been fixed and there are no further issues introduced due to the new changes. Unlike smoke testing, where the main objective is to test if the core functionalities or the major functionalities of your program are working or not, the major objective of sanity testing is to determine that the developer has applied some rationality while building a software program. In sanity testing, the testers try to check if the program makes sense or not. For you guys to understand better, let's consider the same example which we did earlier, which is Gmail example. So Gmail has added a new feature called auto acknowledgement. Let's say this auto acknowledgement feature sends a written mail that email sent is delivered successfully. Now this is a new feature which is to be tested and we already have a build that is stable. So testing the new feature is called sanity testing. So basically in sanity testing, you're trying to see if the application makes sense. For example, let's say if you're checking a calculator application and it returns 2 plus 2 is 5. Does it make sense to go further and check other functionalities? No, right? So it doesn't make sense. Here's a diagram to depict sanity testing. So unlike smoke testing and sanity testing, the stable builds are checked for the functionalities, not the initial builds. So you need to know that here. As you can see, it's stable builds. It can be multiple builds as well. Now, if one of them is sent for sanity testing, testing is performed. And here you have two cases. If your application or if the build fails, then it's rejected. But if it passes sanity testing, then it's passed on for further testing. And that's how simple it is. The only difference is that in smoke testing, testing is done on initial builds, whereas in sanity testing, the testing is done on stable builds. And that's what is being said in the next slide. As you can see, I have build 1, build 2, build 3. These are very initial builds and we're performing smoke tests. So basically we are testing the critical functionalities of your application here. And if your build has failed, it's rejected immediately without passing on to any further testing. If it passes, then it's further sent to functional system or any kind of regression testing. And similarly, in sanity testing, you don't consider the stable builds. You consider moderately stable builds, which have passed certain levels of regression testing. So those are sent for sanity testing. And basically there you verify if there are any bugs or if a new feature is installed, you're checking if the feature is working properly or not. It's not a core function here. And if it passes the test, it's sent for further stages of testing, just like in smoke testing. If it fails, the build is rejected or it's added to rejected builds list. Well, there's one more thing, guys. I've been saying that sanity testing is basically you check for any errors or the new feature which you have added is working properly or not. But then you might confuse it with the regression testing. Well, there are certain cases when regression testing is not done to build due to time constraint, and sanity testing is considered more suitable to check the main functionalities. So they're slightly different. Well, you can say sanity testing is a subset of regression testing. So the next thing is how do you implement sanity testing? It's very similar to smoke testing. Just like in smoke testing, even in sanity testing, you do not have to write any separate test cases. You just have to pick up the necessary test cases that are already written by the programmers. Now let's discuss the previous example with respect to sanity testing. Remember that the prime focus of sanity testing is to initially check and validate that the planned functionality is working as expected. Well, assume that you're working on an e-commerce site and the new feature is released to registration functionality. So basically a new feature is being added to registration functionality. So your main focus is to check if the registration function is working fine or not. So once it is tested, then move on to other major functionalities like payment flow. So basically you check this entire thing for already logged in user. And if the workflow is properly working, then you check it for the guest user as well. So main focus here is to check if there are any bugs in the main functionality and if any new feature is added to test if the feature is working properly or not. And that's what sanity testing is. So if I have to summarize, sanity testing is required only for the necessary output. Only the change features of the product need to be tested. In-depth analysis of software functionality is not necessary in sanity testing. Well, at this point, you know what smoke testing is and what sanity testing is and how they're conducted in the real world. Now let's check out the key differences between smoke testing and sanity testing. Well, I'm comparing these two types of testings on certain major features like purpose of testing, documentation, software builds, and many others. So the first thing that we're discussing here is software builds. Well, we discussed what software build earlier is, right? A software build is the process by which source code is converted to standalone form that can be run on any system without any problem. Well, it's easy to do that on our own if you have like 10 lines of code, but you have 100 and 1,000 lines of code, it's difficult to do. So that's why the software testers or developers develop a software build. Well, we already discussed this earlier. Smoke test is usually performed on initial builds. So the development usually build the software build with the core functionalities, and before it's passed on to any other testing, it's sent for smoke testing. So smoke testing is done on initial builds of software product. Whereas, as you guys know, sanity tests are usually done over builds that have passed smoke tests and many rounds of regression tests. So moving on to next functionality, what we have here is motive of testing. So what's the motive of smoke testing? We did discuss that when we were discussing what smoke testing is. Smoke testing makes sure that the core functionalities of your program are working fine, absolutely. So the motive of smoke testing is to measure the stability of newly created build so that you can move on to the next round of rigorous testing. Whereas sanity testing is done to check if the new functionalities or if there are any bugs or issues are properly fixed or not. So basically in sanity testing, you don't dig much deeper. So the main objective of sanity testing is to verify the rationality and the originality of core functionalities to proceed with more rigorous testing in the future. So in simple terms, smoke testing check for the functionality of core features, whereas sanity testing, you check if the bugs have been fixed and if a new feature is added, if it's working properly or not. So the next feature that we have here is what are these testing subset of? Well, like I said earlier, smoke testing is a subset of regression testing, whereas sanity testing is a subset of acceptance testing. The next feature is when you actually conduct smoke tests and when you conduct sanity tests. We did discuss that earlier as well. Smoke tests are usually conducted on availability of new builds. So as soon as development team starts providing a new build for the testing team, they start with smoke testing. Whereas sanity testing usually performed post completion of regression testing activities. So the initial builds which you get go through smoke testing, lot of smoke testing, every initial build. And if there is any error, they reject it. If not, they pass for further rounds of testing. Let's say it can be regression testing. Now, if that build has passed or successfully completed all kind of regression tests, it's passed on to sanity testing to check if the bugs are fixed properly or not. So basically, smoke testing is executed whenever new builds are available, whereas sanity testing is executed on the builds that come after a few rounds of regression testing. Moving on to next feature, documentation. Well, smoke testing involves documentation and scripting work, whereas sanity testing does not usually concentrate on any sort of documentation or scripting. Like I said, sanity testing is not very deep kind of testing, so you don't need any sort of documentation or scripting here. And since smoke testing deals with core functionalities, it's necessary that you have documented if the release build is working properly or not. And then comes the test coverage. So the smoke testing is shallow and wide approach to include all major functionalities without getting into detail. It may seem as a general type of testing covering all basic functionalities, whereas sanity testing is narrow and is deep approach involve detailed testing of functionalities and features. While it's specialized or more detail-oriented testing technique that focuses on a particular functionality or a feature. Well, there are just two words to describe both the testing. Smoke testing is shallow and wide, whereas sanity testing is narrow and deep. And the last feature that we have to compare these testings are who these testings are performed by. Smoke testings are either executed by developers or testers because developers pass on the initial builds. So they test and pass it to testing team sometimes, or sometimes it's testing team before they start testing for other bugs and all. They start with smoke testing. So the smoke testing is either performed by developers or testers. But whereas sanity testing is executed manually only by testers because, like I said earlier, before the builds come for sanity testing, they undergo rigorous testings like other type of testing, regression testing, functional testing and all that, and they come for sanity testing. So which is mainly done by testers. So there's no point of developers here. Another point is that smoke tests can be executed either automated approach or using manual approach, but sanity tests are usually executed manually. So that's it, guys. With this, we have reached the end of the session, and I hope you have the.
Okay, so that's one thing about sanitary and smoke testing. सो हम लोगों ने रिग्रेशन टेस्टिंग डिस्कस किया था, लेकिन उसके सबसेट्स जो थे वो हम लोगों ने डिस्कस नहीं किए थे. तो दैट्स व्हाट वी हैव डिस्कस्ड फॉर नाउ. अब इसके बाद में नेक्स्ट जो पॉइंट आएगा दैट इज अबाउट कि अगर आपको जब ऑटोमेशन टेस्टिंग करना है, मतलब स्मोक टेस्ट करना है, और विद स्मोक टेस्ट सपोज अगर हम लोगों को वहाँ पे कोई सर्टन चेंजेस अगर लाना है, तो वो चेंजेस अप्लाई हुए नहीं हुए, या वो चेंजेस कैसे अप्लाई करेंगे. जैसे अभी हम लोगों ने देखा कि स्मोक टेस्टिंग के अंदर हमेशा ऐसा नहीं होगा कि डेवलपर ही टेस्ट करेगा. समटाइम्स देयर माइट बी टेस्टर्स हु विल बी टेस्टिंग इट. सो टेस्टर्स को अगर आप टेस्ट करने दे रहे हो इन स्मोक टेस्ट और इन द रिग्रेशन टेस्ट, या तो वो टाइम पे आपको ऑटोमेशन टेस्टिंग टूल्स की ज़रूरत पड़ेगी जो टेस्टर्स यूज़ करेंगे, और उसको आपको टेस्ट केसेस लिख के देना पड़ेगा. सो टेस्ट केसेस है कैसे हम लोग लिख सकते हैं, एंड वो भी सिलेनियम में देखेंगे हम लोग, बिकॉज जो कुछ हम लोग के एप्लीकेशंस होते हैं जो वेब बेस्ड होते हैं उसके स्पेसिफिक ही हम लोग डिस्कशन कर रहे हैं. सो अभी हम लोग देखेंगे कि हाउ टू राइट अ टेस्ट केसेस इन सिलेनियम आईडी.
Attendees, this is Siddhant from Edureka, and I welcome you all to today's learning journey on an automated testing tool called Selenium. Now, if you are an IT aspirant, this video is for you. If you're looking to switch from manual to automation testing, well, this video is definitely for you. In fact, learning Selenium can very well be your entry point to the software industry. So by the end of today's session, I'm going to make sure that you guys are equipped to run your first Selenium test case. But before we begin, let me quickly course you all through today's training session. So first, I'll be talking about why you should be using Selenium. Then I'll tell you what Selenium is. Then I'll introduce you to the versions it has had and the suite of tools that it offers. Then I'll show you how to set Selenium up. And finally, we'll be going hands-on in Selenium and running our first test case. So without any further ado, let's get started. So the first thing that I'd like you people to understand is why go with Selenium as your tool for testing. Now, starting with the most obvious reason, Selenium is an automated testing tool. Now, when I say automated testing tool, I'm fundamentally referring to the software tools that can enable automation or automate the process of testing an application, unlike the manual testing tools where every possibility of input, output, and interaction with the application has to be recorded, reported, and compared manually. So just like it sounds, manual testing can be a really tedious task. It'll need you to expend a lot of energy and time, especially in today's world where every application or website has innumerable lines of code and mundane amounts of data behind them. But with automated tools, all that hassle can just become automatic. Now, how many of you remember the rudimentary handheld fans that we used back in the day? So it was basically this flat surface that had to be waved back and forth continuously for us to feel cooler on hotter days. Well, we've come a long way since then, haven't we? All it takes now is the flick of a switch or just pressing a button for our air conditioners to kick in and make it cold for us. Anyways, I was just trying to tell you how we've been moving from manual to automatic ever since. So somebody seems to have a question. Mahesh wants me to tell you if Selenium is the only automated testing tool that there is. Well, no, Mahesh, you're right, it isn't. So why should you use Selenium then? Well, to answer that question, we'll have to go meet others that are like Selenium. So QTP, RFT, and Test Complete are also automated testing tools and are the very best based on industry standards. So QTP stands for Quick Test Professional and RFT stands for Rational Functional Tester. So I've gone ahead and I've put them all into a table so that it's easy for us to compare. Now the first feature we're looking at is license. QTP requires you to be licensed by HP, similarly RFT by IBM and Test Complete by Smart Bear Software. But Selenium is an open source tool and does not require a license to be used. Now these licensed products can be pretty expensive for just a single person to buy, but open source products can be used by just about anybody for free. Now talking of customer support, the licensed products will never let you down. Selenium, however, does not really have a rigid support for customers, but depends entirely on an open source community with lots of insanely active developers on it. Now coming to the programming skills, QTP and RFT does not require you to be much of a coder. Test Complete will need some coding skills though, and in case of Selenium, you'll get to explore and flaunt all your coding skills. Moving on, QTP and RFT work only on Windows, and Test Complete limits itself to only Windows 7 or higher versions of Windows, but Selenium on the other hand works good on almost any operating system. Now the final feature we're looking at is language support, wherein QTP supports only VBScript, RFT supports Java and C#, Test Complete supports VBScript, JScript, Delphi script, C++, and C#, whereas Selenium gives you a dynamic range of support for almost all popular programming languages like Java, C#, Ruby, Python, Perl, and PHP. Now, all that being said, I take it that you folks now have a better understanding so as to why Selenium is a technology that has been trending among its peers. So apart from beating the challenges of manual testing, here's why Selenium is your best choice. Being open source, it is available for free. It does not really matter what operating system you've been using. Also, Selenium will let you perform tests on almost any web browser and let you pick whichever programming language you're comfortable in writing your test cases in. So before we move on to define what Selenium is, you should know that there are several tools to test every other type of applications, but dynamic web applications are best tested with Selenium, and those are the only kinds of application that Selenium is designed to test. Now that brings us to our next topic. Let us finally establish a concrete definition to what Selenium is. So Selenium is just an open source tool that can automate almost any web browser. And that is all there is to it. So let us go ahead and exemplify this definition. Now here's a manual tester who's really troubled with testing the overwhelming web applications that make up most of our cyberspace today. So he's really stressed over the alarming number of test cases he has to work upon every day. So all that stress at work makes him feel like his head is always at the brink of an explosion. But don't worry, I went ahead and I told him what Selenium could do. So let us see what he has to say now. Wow, seems like he's pretty relaxed now, huh? Well, what can I say? I guess Selenium can do that to you. Anyways, let's take note of a few important points before we move on to our next topic. So as I've already mentioned, Selenium can only be used to test web applications. It is fast and easy to use, even with large sets of data, and has a guaranteed accuracy. So with too much data to handle, humans can be prone to mistakes. But lucky for us, Selenium is not human. And now that we know what Selenium is, let us also quickly go over how web applications are tested in it. Being able to automate any web browser, Selenium directly runs scripts in that browser to simultaneously automate the web application and test it. So we'll be running our first test case towards the end of today's session so that you people can relate to everything that we are learning right now. Let me now introduce you to the suite of tools Selenium comprises and the versions that have evolved over the years. Now, the latest release of Selenium is version 3.12.0. And these are the components that Selenium has offered over the years: the Selenium IDE, the Selenium Grid, Selenium RC, and the Selenium WebDriver. So let us look into each of these and understand why they're a part of Selenium. So initially, Selenium RC was used to write test cases in different programming languages and run recorded scripts in any browser. But RC had a few drawbacks that led to its deprecation. Like say RC had a complex architecture which required everything to be passed through a RC server, making it really slow. Now moving further, we also have the IDE, which was previously known as the Selenium Recorder. It provides an environment to execute test cases, record them, and export the programming code in different languages. And then we also have the Selenium Grid that enables parallel and distributed testing by executing test cases across remote machines irrespective of whatever operating system they might use. Now that leaves us with the WebDriver. Let me simultaneously talk about the evolution of Selenium as we understand what WebDriver is. So the first version of Selenium came with the Selenium IDE, the Selenium Grid, and the Selenium RC. A little later, a separate project called WebDriver was also getting popular as a superior tool for browser automation. And by the time Selenium launched its second version, it had merged Selenium RC with the WebDriver and decided to call it Selenium WebDriver instead. Now, this was because WebDriver overcame all the shortcomings that Selenium RC had been posing for a while. In fact, WebDriver enabled the scope for providing better functionalities with Selenium. Like with the advent of WebDriver, Selenium had no need for the RC server to be the middleman anymore. It could now directly interact with the browser to run tests, making it faster than ever. It also removed all the redundancies and confusing commands of Selenium RC and made sure that disabled elements on any web page or web app stay inaccessible. So by the third version, Selenium WebDriver witnessed improvements of all sorts and became the flagship tool for Selenium. So it could basically do everything that Selenium RC did, but in a better way and with more features. All right, so now that we have seen the why and the what of Selenium, we've also made ourselves familiar with its version and components. Let us now move to the how of Selenium, as in how to set it up for use. So there are three important prerequisites to using Selenium. So first, we'll be needing a way to write our test scripts in, which will be provided by our programming language, which in our case will be Java. Then we'll need an environment where those programming codes make sense and can be executed, which will be provided by our IDE, that is Eclipse. And finally, we'll be needing a framework, which is essentially a set of tools which will allow us to access the proper resources to automate and test the web applications. And that is provided by Selenium. So let's get started on installing and setting these up. So the first step will be installing Java. And how can you do that? You can visit the link that's given on the slide and download the latest release of the Java platform. So I'll anyways go ahead and give you a demo of it. Let's open a browser, type in Java into it. Once you've done that, let's look for Java Standard Edition. Here is our standard edition. So let's go to SE, downloads. Here we can see 10 to be the latest release of Java. Go ahead and download the JDK for it. Accept the license agreement and download JDK for your operating system. Once you've downloaded the JDK, you'll get a setup file. Please go ahead and install it on your system. But we still have one more step to do before we can use Java on our system. So once you're done with the installation, the next process would be setting up your environment variables to use JDK with Eclipse. So how can we do that? It's pretty simple. You can go to my PC or this PC and go to the properties. The system window opens. You go to the advanced system settings. So once you've clicked on advanced system settings, there'll be another window that pops up with the name system properties. Find the advanced tab under it and go to environment variables. So once you've done that, the environment variables window now pops up. Find the user variable. So go ahead and click on the new button under the user variables. Once you've done that, there should be a window that says edit user variable. Now under that window, go to the variable name and set it as path. And as for the variable value, you will have to find the JDK folder that has been installed on your system. Go into it and there must be a folder called bin. Copy the location of the folder and paste it as the variable value for path. So basically we'll need the location of the bin folder in your JDK folder. So once you have done that, go ahead and click on OK and create another new variable in the same fashion and name it Java_home this time and set the value of the variable as the location of the JDK folder on your system. So once you've done that, click on OK and you're done setting up your environment variables and you can use JDK with Eclipse. So let's go ahead and download Eclipse first. So you can visit the link that's been given here, or I'll anyways be doing it. Let's go to Google and click on the address bar, type in Eclipse. Once we've done that, we'll find the official website. We can see the latest release of Eclipse to be Oxygen. Go ahead and download it from a page like this. And once you've done that, you'll get a setup file. Please go ahead and install that setup file on your system. So that is all you'll need to do for Eclipse. So once Eclipse has been installed, the next step would be downloading Selenium jar files. You can visit the link here and you'll find a window of this kind under which there'll be many versions of Selenium. Go ahead and select the version that you want and download it. I'll anyways be doing it so that you people know which files exactly to download. Let's go to Selenium this time. Once you've done that, go to the official website, click on downloads. You can see the latest release to be here. So you can go ahead and download it. Or if you want to download one of the previous releases, click on previous releases. You'll find so many versions here. Let's say we want to download 3.9. Now there's so many files in the 3.9 folder, but you don't have to download all of them. We'll just be needing Selenium Server 3.9.1.zip and Selenium Server Standalone 3.9.1.jar. So download both these files. You should get a zip folder and a jar file. Let's then get back to the web page. And I'll encourage you to download a few more things that we'll be requiring. The first is a driver for the Internet Explorer, downloaded according to your specifications. Then come to third-party drivers, bindings and plugins, install the Gecko driver for Mozilla Firefox and the Chrome driver for Google Chrome. So once you've done that, you should get 3 more zip files. Let me show you how they should look after you've downloaded them. So these are the drivers that we downloaded. Go ahead and extract them. Similarly, this should be the Selenium server zip file. Go ahead and extract it. Once you've extracted the drivers, they should be in folders like this, containing the respective drivers. Similarly, the jar files. The Selenium server standalone is a jar file that we downloaded, and we also extracted a few more jar files like these. And then there are more jar files inside the libs folder. So we'll be needing all of these. Let us go ahead to the slide. So once we've downloaded the jar files, we'll have to configure Eclipse for Selenium. Now, how can we do that? For that, we'll have to open Eclipse first. Let's go ahead and do that. There we go. So first, there'll be an Eclipse launcher that'll ask you to set a workspace. It's basically just a folder where all your projects are going to be saved in. So click on launch once you've done specifying your workspace. Here we are. So let's see what our slide says. So it's telling us to create a new Java project, name it, then configure the build path for Eclipse to recognize Selenium, right? So these are the steps. We'll have to add the jar files that we've downloaded and click on apply and close. So let's go ahead and do that. So the first thing we'll be doing is creating a new project. That is a new Java project, and name it Selenium project, let's say. Once we have done that, let's go ahead and click on finish. So here is our project under which we have a source folder and the Java files. So let us go ahead and add the Selenium files to it. We go to build path, we configure build path. Under the module path, we can see all the Java files. So let's go to class path and add the external jar files. So find the location of your jar files, then select them all, open. So I have more jar files that I have to add jar files. So there were 2 in this folder, open, and there must be another one that is a standalone one. So let's go ahead and add that too. And finally, when you're done, go ahead and click on apply and close. So once you've done that, there would be another folder called reference libraries. So now you've configured Eclipse to use Selenium in it. So let's go to our next slide now. All right. So that brings us to our last section, which is hands-on in Selenium. So now that the prerequisites have all been installed and Selenium has been configured for Eclipse IDE, how about we automate and test Gmail using Google Chrome? Well, okay. So this is the test script for it. Let me anyways go and write it down so that we can run out first test script. What will we do? We'll go ahead and first create a package, just like Java goes. So co.edureka., let's say selenium.demo, right? So let's click on finish. Go ahead and create a class. Let's say I'll name my class demo as well. And I'll make sure there's a main method in it and click on finish. So here we have our class. Let's go ahead and write the test case. So while I write the code, I'll also be walking you through it. So don't you worry if you don't understand something, we'll all be covering that. So now we have our Java files here and our jar files for Selenium here. But what about the drivers that we added? So these drivers are really important things. They are the ones that can instantiate your browser, which means drivers are necessary if you want to automate your web browsers. So we'll have to type in a command so that our drivers are connected to our program. So the command for it is set property, under which we'll have to tell the command about what driver we are talking about first. We're talking about the web driver that is of Google Chrome. Okay. So once I've done that, let me also go ahead and tell the command where to find it. So I'll have to go and find my Google Chrome driver, which is Chrome driver, copy the location for it. So this is the location of the folder that it is in, but we need the location of the file. So we'll be adding that. So now that we've done that, let us add the name of the file as well, which is Chrome driver. And what is the type of file it is? It is an exe file. So that's it. We've gone ahead and we have successfully connected the driver to our programs. So let us go ahead and create a reference variable for the interface web driver. So I'll name my reference variable driver and assign it an object of the class Chrome driver. Now these interfaces and classes have been provided to us by the Selenium jar files that we added. We just have to import it to our program. So I use a constructor to initialize the reference variable with an object. So now you can see an error here. That's because we have not imported our interface and our classes. So if you hover your mouse over it, you can see an option to import the interface first, and then let's go and import the class as well. We've imported the class as well now. So now let's use our driver to call some methods that will, let's say, open a website for me first. So what website do we want to open? We want to open Gmail. So I'll have to type in that .gmail.com, right? So that is our web page. Now, once it has opened the web page for me, I'll ask it to maximize the window that I'm viewing my browser in. We can do that by the commands driver.manage.window.maximize. Okay, so let's use our driver and find a web element. Now, what is a web element? Well, any component, anything on a web page is a web element. Okay, so in this case, let's say this is the placeholder where I will want my email ID to be. So this is my web element. So let me inspect it. So once I've done that, I can see this web element to have a few attributes here. So that is how we're going to find that web element and send some text to it, which is in my case, my email ID. So find element. Once you've done that, we'll also have to tell it how to find the element. So we'll be using the ID name to find the element, which is identifier ID. So let's say by ID, we'll have to tell it the name of the ID as well. And we just saw the name of the ID to be identifier and ID, right? Okay, so once we've done that, we'll also have to tell it what to do once it finds the web element for us. It'll send some text to it, which can be done by the command send keys. So what keys do we want to send it? I want to send an email ID, let's say, right? I've sent an email ID to it. Now, once I've entered my email ID, I will like to click on the next button. Let's go and inspect it. All right, so I can see the class name to be CWAK9. So let me go ahead and find the element by the class name. And the command would be by dot class name. And we'll have to give it the class name as well, which in our case was CWAK9, right? Let's that. Now we've done that. So what does it do once it finds it? It'll click on the button, right? So let's tell it to click. We've done that. So all of this should happen automatically. That's the entire purpose of writing the script. So now that I've gone ahead and I've automated some of my browser features, how about I also build a small test case? So let's say I declare a variable of the string type and I name it AT for my reference to actual title, and I ask my driver to get me the title of the web page that it automatically opened. So get title. So what should our title be actually? I mean, since we are opening Gmail, the title should be Gmail, right? So let me go ahead and create another string variable, name it ET for expected title, and we're expecting it to be Gmail, right? So let me also go ahead and close the browser that I've opened with the driver.close command. Now, after that, let me go ahead and use the string variables to establish a test condition. So that can be done best with the if statement. So let's say AT dot equals, I want to ignore cases. I just want the names to be same. So I'll tell it to ignore cases. And so if this happens, if they match, we'll know that our test is successful. So we'll print the same. Test successful. And if that does not happen, we'd know that something went wrong and our test was unsuccessful. So let's print out the same. Print ln. And what do we write? We wanted to display test failure, right? So we've successfully built a test case. So let me go ahead and execute it. So my browser opened automatically. It also navigated to Gmail, entered my ID and closed the window. But it happened really fast, so you people must not have seen everything. but it says test successful, which means our titles also match. But I would still like to slow the automation down so that you people can actually see everything that happened. So that is also possible. We can do it by thread.sleep. Let's say I'll ask it to sleep for 2000 milliseconds. Similarly, I have one more sleep command after we've clicked on the next button. So this is not necessary. I mean, normally testing would require you to do it really fast so that in a matter of second, maybe 1,000 cases can be done or more. But I'm doing this so that you people can see everything that happened. Okay, thread requires us to throw an exception. So we did that. Let me now go ahead and run it. Okay, so my browser is open and I have Gmail and my ID typed in with the screen got maximized. I'm in the window and that's it. We also closed the browser and it says test was successful. So congratulations, we just ran our first Selenium test case. Let us go back to the slide. So this was the code that we just ran and our test was a success. So that brings us to the end of our session. Let us finally go over the session in a minute. First, we discussed why you should be using Selenium because it is free, open source, works on any operating system, any web browser, and lets you code in multiple programming languages. Then we saw what Selenium is. We defined it. It is just an open source tool that can automate almost any browser. Then we went over the versions it has and the suite of tools that it offers. And we also saw how to set Selenium up, the 3 prerequisites for it. And we finally ran a test case in Selenium. So that's it for today.
Okay, so we have now done with the Selenium testing कैसे होता है. So देखो ये जो हम लोगों ने पैटर्न समझा यहाँ पे ये सेम आपको याद रखना है. बेसिकली आपको एटलीस्ट अपने जो क्रिटिकल फंक्शंस है ना उसके ऊपर तो ये सेम सिलेनियम टेस्ट जो है वो अप्लाई करना है. तो हम लोगों ने जावा वाला एग्जांपल देखा. यू कैन ऑल्सो चेक फॉर PHP और एनी अदर थिंग्स. आपको सिर्फ सर्च करना है सिलेनियम सपोर्ट या उसका लाइब्रेरी या फिर उसके ऊपर टेस्ट केसेस हम लोग कैसे लिख सकते हैं फॉर आर एंड्रॉयड एप्लीकेशन or for Java or for PHP or ASP.NET, whatever we have. Okay, so make sure you at least try it once. Yeah. Bolo, any doubt? हाँ बोलो.
So for Android apps, is there something else? Because this is more for the web applications.
Yeah, Android app के लिए भी we might be having Selenium का this. I'll just check. I don't remember. एक सेकेंड. वेब एप्लीकेशन के लिए मैंने देखा है. एंड्रॉयड के लिए I need to verify. Let me just verify once.
Okay, sir.
Okay, we do have for Android. It's called as APM Selenium. APM Selenium है, that we can use it. I'll just post that in chat window.
Okay, sir.
Automation testing using mobile application using APM Selenium. So we can use this one. So you can try this one. As you can see कि most of जो हम लोगों के अलग-अलग web based applications होता है या mobile based applications होता है, for that we have one or the other things. So APM search करना you will find it. मोबाइल एप्लीकेशंस के लिए दिस इज मस्ट. सो आप देखो कि अभी इफ वी हैव वेब एप्लीकेशन एंड मोबाइल एप्लीकेशन, सो अगेन वो दोनों के अलग अलग टेस्ट केसेस बनेंगे एंड दैट वी सपोज टू राइट इट डाउन और ये दोनों को हम लोग साइमल्टेनियस चलाएंगे. गेटिंग सो द टेस्टिंग जो है वो ऑटोमेशन टेस्टिंग से आपका काम थोड़ा सिंपल कर रहा है, लेकिन सेम वे टेस्टिंग के अंदर जो अलग अलग टाइप के टेस्टिंग हम लोगों ने पढ़े वो अप्लाई करना इज वेरी मच रिक्वायर्ड. वो अप्लाई करने के बाद में ही आपका सॉफ्टवेयर या एप्लीकेशन जो है वो क्लाइंट एंड पे डिप्लॉय होगा. सो आई कैन से कि वी हैव अ मोबाइल एप्लीकेशन एंड अ वेबसाइट, दोनों के लिए हम लोगों ने सिलेनियम यूज करके टेस्ट केसेस डिफाइन कर दिए। अब दोनों को एट सेम पॉइंट ऑफ टाइम हम लोग रन करेंगे। जैसे इफ आई हैव अ वेबसाइट एंड एन मोबाइल ऐप, और दोनों पे अगर मैं एक सेम यूजर को, लेट्स सपोज वी हैव अ बैंकिंग एप्लीकेशन, तो फॉर बैंक आई हैव अ वेबसाइट एंड अ मोबाइल ऐप। तो मैं मेरे एक क्लाइंट को वेबसाइट और मोबाइल ऐप पे दोनों लोकेशंस पे एक सेम टाइम पे मैं लॉग इन कराऊंगा, एंड देन आई विल चेक कि इफ एट सेम पॉइंट ऑफ टाइम दोनों साइड से अगर पैसा ट्रांजेक्शन हो रहा है, लाइक सपोज आई हैव 10,000 इन माई बैंक अकाउंट। अब आई विल राइट अ टेस्ट केस हियर, और वो टेस्ट केस में मैं क्या चेक करूंगा कि इफ आई ट्राई टू ट्रांसफर 10,000 फ्रॉम अ वेब एप्लीकेशन एंड 10,000 फ्रॉम मोबाइल एप्लीकेशन एट सेम पॉइंट ऑफ टाइम, देन हाउ माई सिस्टम रिएक्ट्स। आपका डेटाबेस कितना सिक्योर है, कौन करेंसी वो अप्लाई कर रहा है, अगर अप्लाई कर रहा है तो उसके साथ में लॉक्स अप्लाई कर रहा है कि नहीं। जैसे हम लोगों ने एग्जाम्पल देखा था कि अगर हम लोग बुक माई शो पे है और दो लोकेशन से इफ आई ट्राई टू बुक अ टिकट, तो कोई एक जो आपका बुक माई शो का जो एक लोकेशन रहेगा वहां पे डीबीएमएस के जो हम लोगों ने लॉक्स पढ़े थे, तो टेम्पररी दोज लॉक्स विल बी अप्लाइड देयर। अगर वो लॉक अगर अप्लाई नहीं होगा, दैट विल क्रिएट अ प्रॉब्लम। सो वी आर सेल्स गोइंग टू ट्राई दिस आउट। ठीक है, सो मैं अगर आपको प्रैक्टिकली अगर बताऊं, वी हैव आई विल जस्ट शेयर माय स्क्रीन। So as you can see, we have book my show. यहाँ पे we have book my show at this place, and again book my show on this browser. एंड दोनों लोकेशंस पे अभी आपको क्या करना है, वी सपोज टू राइट अ टेस्ट केस जहाँ पे दोनों लोकेशंस पे, अब देखो यहाँ पे जब मैं बुक माई शो पे क्लिक कर रहा हूँ फ्रॉम दिस ब्राउजर एंड फ्रॉम क्रोम ब्राउजर, सो कहीं ना कहीं क्या होगा, कोई एक ब्राउजर के ऊपर इट्स गोइंग टू टेक 1 or 2 minutes टाइम टू बुक अ टिकट्स। ठीक है, नाउ मेरे पास यहाँ पे ये मूवी आ गया, सपोज आई हैव दिस मूवी और सम अदर मूवी, कोई भी एक जो मूवी मुझे दिख रहा है वो मैं यहाँ से अगर बुक कर रहा हूँ, सपोज दिस वन ओनली विल गो विद दिस वन। ओके, सो वी हैव दिस मूवी वंडर वुमन। I'll click on book tickets, English 2D. Up, these are the options. I'll go on Mozilla browser. I'll click on same movie. Okay, I'll click here on the same movie. And we'll try to book a ticket. तो सेम मैं यहाँ से सिलेक्ट कर रहा हूँ, इंग्लिश 2D। अब देखो सेम ऑप्शंस आपको दोनों ब्राउजर पे मिलेंगे। हियर आई हैव इनऑर्बिट मलाड वाला ऑप्शन, and here also I have in-orbit Malad wala option because the location remains the same. So मैं यहाँ से I can just click here, accept it, and I'll select 2 tickets. Same way यहाँ पे भी I'll accept, I'll select 2 tickets. अब यहाँ पे मैंने select किया, same here also I have selected, and यहाँ पे मैं pay पे click कर रहा हूँ और यहाँ पे मैं pay पे click कर रहा हूँ. So which one should work? As you can see, जैसे ही यहाँ पे पे वाला पेज पे मैं रिडायरेक्ट हो गया, दिस वन गॉट रिजेक्टेड। सो ये आपको चेक करना रहता है। अब ये एक बार तो हो गया है, अब जब मैंने ब्राउजर स्विच किया तो उसमें एटलीस्ट 1 सेकेंड का तो टाइम लग गया। अब आपको क्या करना है, वी सपोज टू राइट ए टेस्ट केस जहाँ पे हम लोग दोनों ब्राउजर पे सेम पॉइंट ऑफ टाइम अगर ये सेम अगर रन करेंगे, बिकॉज ये होना पॉसिबिलिटी बहुत ज़्यादा है। सो अगर हम लोग ये सेम टाइम पे अगर दोनों रन करेंगे, देन वी सपोज टू फाइंड इट आउट कि हाउ इट रिएक्ट्स देन। ठीक है, अब देखो यहाँ पे अगर मैंने ये जो ट्रांजेक्शन है वो मेरा कैंसिल कर दिया मैंने, ठीक है, बुकिंग नहीं किया मैंने। नाउ मैं अगर रिफ्रेश करता हूं तो जो सीट्स सिलेक्ट किए थे अभी भी वो फ्री नहीं हुए, बिकॉज उसके ऊपर टेम्पररी लॉक अप्लाई हो गया है, और वो डेटाबेस का लॉक है, वो टेम्पररी रहेगा, बाद में रिलीज हो जाएगा अगर पेमेंट सक्सेस नहीं होगा तो। सो ये सारी चीजें आपको चेक करने रहते हैं। या कॉन्करेंसी कंट्रोल होगा, और डेटाबेस के लॉक्स, डेडलॉक डिटेक्शन एंड डेडलॉक रिवोकेशन एंड डेडलॉक प्रिवेंशन टेक्निक्स जो हम लोग डेटाबेस में पढ़ते हैं, सेम विल बी अप्लाइंग हियर एज वेल। नाउ नेक्स्ट जो पॉइंट है जहाँ पे वी टॉक अबाउट कि आपका दो प्लेसेस के ऊपर जो एक साथ रिक्वेस्ट जा रहा है फॉर बुकिंग ऑफ सम मूवी और टिकट, और उसके साथ में अभी हम लोगों को ये भी देखना है कि अगर दो लोकेशंस पे अगर साथ में हम लोगों ने मूवी टिकट्स के लिए बुकिंग अप्लाई किया, अब दोनों के ऊपर अगर अप्लाई हो गया और दोनों अगर पेमेंट कर रहे हैं तो किसका पेमेंट हम लोग एक्सेप्ट करेंगे। सो ये सारी चीजें जो है ना, ये आपको फ्रिक्वेंटली, और ये सिर्फ दो साइड से नहीं, वी माइट ट्राई टू वर्क, सिर्फ दो नहीं हो सकते, इट माइट बी मोर देन 2 people और मोर देन 5 or 10 people हु आर ट्राइंग टू गेट द एक्सेस ऑफ। अब देखो इन पेंडेमिक टाइम द सिचुएशन इज डिफरेंट। अब एक कोई अच्छा मूवी अगर रिलीज होता है, लाइक वी हैव सूर्यवंशम और सम अदर मूवी जिसके लिए पीपल आर वेटिंग फ्रॉम सो लॉन्ग, राइट नाउ वी डोंट हैव एनी गुड मूवी इन थिएटर एंड दैट्स व्हाई पीपल आर नॉट विजिटिंग मोर देयर। बट जैसे ही कोई एक अच्छा मूवी अगर रिलीज होगा, पीपल विल गो क्रेजी, लाइक कि कितने टाइम से हम लोगों ने देखा नहीं है, एंड पीपल विल कीप बुकिंग, एडवांस बुकिंग होता है। तो वो टाइम पे आप देखो कि इफ देर आर 5, 10 और मोर देन 10 or 15 people और transactions are happening on the same data, then how we are going to tackle that situation? तो वो सिचुएशन हम लोग कैसे टैकल कर सकते हैं, उसके लिए ऑटोमेशन टेस्टिंग टूल सिलेनियम अप्लाई करेंगे, एंड दैट इज द मोस्ट क्रिटिकल पार्ट ऑफ योर सिस्टम, और उसके लिए हम लोग स्मोक टेस्टिंग अप्लाई करेंगे। आई होप प्रीवियस लेक्चर और अभी के लेक्चर में जो पॉइंट्स डिस्कस किए मैंने कंबाइन बताया आपको विद रियल एग्जाम्पल। तो थोड़ा कुछ जो हम लोगों ने देखा और थोड़ा जो मैं आपको उस पर कुछ पॉइंट्स ऐड करके कंबाइन बता रहा हूँ, सो यू शुड हैव अ नॉलेज अबाउट दिस। ओके, any doubt let me know, else we'll stop today's lecture here. Any doubts anyone? Any doubts? Okay, so we'll stop today's lecture here then.